inviting me. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in and hanging out with me over the last hour. Really, really love talking to everybody. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. And have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla.
Thank you.
Just letting everybody know the next speaking event is happening in 15 minutes and it's intro to API. So if you guys want to learn about that, the link is on the Discord.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, Mexico. Oh, Mexico.
Gandhi, Simon,
Name,
I just copy from the book.
author.
Not even need to put Jeff, man.
His assignment's very short.
Bro, his assignment is literally from the book. I just copy everything from the book.
Whoa, shit. I just connected with Priscilla Wang.
Oh, I know kontol. Yo, announce the next meeting is already open. I opened the meeting already.
Man. Don't allow anyone in except us and speaker.
Dennis, Jesse, Kia. Where's the speaker?
Sreeya Sai.
Yeah, where is she?
I mean, where?
She's not here yet.
The Zoom.
Yeah, she's not in the Zoom yet.
Because it hasn't started.
Do what?
15.
Oh,
Stop recording first.
it's not recording.
It is. Pause.
Sounds good. And then I shared a link for our chat later, just for reference.
Awesome. Should I wait like a minute or two for people to trickle in, or just get started?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's whatever suits you the best. But we already have a few attendants. If you want to wait some more, I think it's okay.
Yeah,
Maybe-
just let me know
Yeah.
whenever you want to start.
I'm totally fine waiting like a few more minutes.
Okay,
Whatever
sure.
works. Yeah, this workshop shouldn't take like the full 45 minutes. But yeah.
I think Michelle will start a few more people coming.
Sounds good. And then I shared a link for our chat later, just for reference. So basically, I love, you know, if you have it installed and
I think I can start now. So hi everyone, we have here with us Sreeya Sai. She's a software engineer at Drift and she's going to host an intro to API workshop.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm just gonna post the slide deck and the code in the chat if you want to follow along. And I'll also share it in the Discord after in case anyone misses it. I know like the chat sometimes disappears if you join after. And let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? Cool. And there'll be a 15-minute session at the end for questions, but I'll also stop in the middle too in case anyone has any questions there. But yeah, so today I wanted to make this presentation Halloween themed, but actually only the first slide has Halloween characters on it. But yeah, thank you all so much for attending the workshop today. Today we're going to be doing something hopefully you think is fun. We're going to be working with the Spotify API and using them to get an introduction to how APIs work and how to use them. So a little bit about me. My name is Sreeya, and I'm currently a software engineer at Drift, and I focus mainly on backend development, which is like working with APIs or building APIs for Drift, working with our data. And Drift is a chatbot system that pops up on people's websites. You might have seen it. It might be Drift. It might be another one of our competitors or something like that. But yeah, and if you want to connect with me after, feel free to email me any questions, or probably the best method is on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me and ask me any questions there. If you want any advice on software engineering or like hackathons. I used to do a lot of hackathons in college, so happy to help with that. And this is a brief overview of what we're going to go over during this workshop. So first, we're going to start off with the basic structure of a web application and then go into what is exactly an API and how you can communicate with them. And then we're going to get into how to talk to the Spotify API, authenticate with it. And then we're going to dig into some code and then do some demo with my Spotify information. You'll see that I listen to a lot of Taylor Swift, which is like a little embarrassing, but I'm just going to own it. I listen to a lot of Taylor Swift. So yeah, let's get into it. So the basic structure of a web application. So say you go to like a marketplace like Amazon, something like that, is you have a web client and a web server. So these are the users on the left, and the user interacts with the web client or your browser. So say you're like searching something on Amazon, and then you want to, like, say you're searching for shoes and you hit enter. So Amazon, the browser talks to the server and gets all of the data for you, all the data on the shoes that you might want to purchase. And after the browser sends a request to the backend or the server sends you a response, and then that data is presented to the user. So then that's kind of the flow of data. So when users interact with websites, basically your browser goes and talks to the server, and the server gets you a bunch of data and displays it onto the front end. So now that we've discussed like the basic architecture of a web application, what exactly is an API? So an API is actually an application program interface. So what the heck does that mean? So I like to think of it as this layer over here that is kind of like in front of the server, and it acts as kind of like the top layer of the server. So this is like the information that the server like presents, that you're able to present to a browser. So like a browser or another server doesn't really care about the backend implementation of how Spotify works. It doesn't really care about how it computes what your top 20 songs are, how it computes like the song features, like how many beats are in a song. It only cares about the data that is returned to you by it. So basically an API is like this interface that exposes some amount of information, but we don't really care about like the implementation behind it. It's literally like an interface that you can get like the top songs that you've listened to, or like the audio features for a track. And the way that you communicate with an API is through HTTP, which is Hypertext Transport Protocol, which I'll go over a little more in the next slide. So basically, when you have a browser, it communicates with the server through an HTTP request, and servers can communicate with each other through HTTP as well. So in order, just like how we communicate to each other, like in English or whatever language, there's a structure to the way that we communicate, like there's verbs, sentences. So there's like a general structure of how we communicate. So similarly, different servers have like a method of communication between each other. So you have to structure that communication. So the way that an HTTP request is structured is that it has a method. So the two most popular ones and the two that we're going to use today is a GET request and a POST request. And it also has a URL. So in this example here, we send the request to this www.test101.com URL, and we're sending a GET request. And then as a response, it's saying that like we're going to get some piece of data, whether it's an HTML page or it's like a bunch of data on whatever this URL has. And so a POST request is another type of request. And this type of request is, so a GET request is when you're like asking for data from the server and you're just retrieving it. But POST is like, say you go onto Amazon and you fill out your cart and you want to send that data to Amazon. So POST request is when you are like updating a resource on the API, or you want to update a resource in Amazon server. So you're like sending data to Amazon, versus GET is when you're retrieving data from Amazon or retrieving data from a server. And there's also other requests like delete. So if you want to delete a resource in a server, and then there's also patch if you want to just like modify a resource in a server. So yeah, there's a lot of different third-party APIs. So today we're going to go over Spotify, but some third-party APIs that I've been playing around with recently is Clarify. So Clarify is like an image recognition API where you can send an image to it via a POST request, and it will tell you information about the image, like what objects are in the image. Like if you send a dog image, it'll be like, this is a dog. Also like Google APIs, you can access information about like your Gmail, or you can access information about other people's Gmails if they give you permission to, which we'll go over next. And then there's also Open Weather. So like if you're interested in weather, you can access the information there. So before going on to the next slide, I want to do like a little bit of a demo of like what happens when you go to a website. So say I go to like facebook.com, and this is my Facebook. So if you go and inspect elements, and this is what's called like the developer tools, and you go to the network tab. So here's where like you can see all the magic happening. So if I refresh the page, you can actually see that so you can see all the requests that this browser is sending to Facebook's server. So here you can actually see like the first request is facebook.com, and it's a GET request. So you can see that it has a bunch of headers. You can see like the whole structure of this request. And if you go to the response here, you can see that it returned an HTML page. So like whenever I go onto this website, www.facebook.com, it actually sends a GET request to Facebook server, and it pulls up this HTML page, which it then displays to me And similarly, if you go to like google.com and you search for like Taylor Swift or something like that, you can see here that actually it sends a request to the back end. Wait, let me refresh this again. So if I start typing like this, you can see that every single letter that I enter, it actually like returns a bunch of data to us here. So this is like a really cool way to kind of like play around with all your like favorite websites. I don't know if like Google is a favorite website, but any website that you go to regularly, you can go to the networks tab and see like every time you type in something into a form or like you type in something into a box, it like sends more requests here. And then you can see like, these are the next things that are in this box. And you can see how like the data that is returned from the server of that website is presented to you. So this data here, it seems like every time you type here, it like brings up a list of things that it could potentially search here. I think these are my old searches. Yeah, so you can see like a list of things that, oh yeah, so like Taylor Swift folklore, Taylor Swift songs, Taylor Swift, blah, blah, blah. So everything that you search is in this box here. So it's like a fun little thing you can do whenever you're bored is look at the network tab and see like what data is returned. Cool, so the next thing I wanna talk about is OAuth. So how do you authorize requests to an API? So basically like not anyone can just go in and request data from Spotify's API. Especially like I'm not able to request your Spotify information or what songs you're listening to if you didn't give me permission to do so. And similarly, like I'm not able to access my own information if I don't log in. So this is OAuth is a standard process for basically authorization with third-party APIs. So also if you go look at Google APIs, they also have an OAuth process that you need to follow. So this is like the diagram that I pulled from Spotify API developer website, which is like very long and complicated. But the basic gist, so in my own words, the basic gist is you have a client ID and you have a bunch of scopes that basically define what data you're asking someone to give permission to you. So a scope could be like you can read the top songs, or you can read the current playing track, or you can modify like the current song state or like the state of the player in Spotify. So you can either like read or modify, but you have to define the specific things that you have access to. And similarly, like say you go onto a website and they use like Google OAuth or something like that, or they use like your Gmail data, it's specifically going to ask you like, do I have permission to access your Gmail data? And when you agree to that, you only are giving permission to your Gmail data, like they can't access your Google Drive data or any of your other Google data. So it just sets like a small scope for what data like you're giving people access to. So with the client ID and the scopes, you currently prompt the user to log in. So you create this URL and you prompt the user to log in. And once they log in, Spotify gives you an authorization code, and then you can trade that authorization code for an access token, and then you can start doing requests to Spotify and have access to their information, which we'll go over in the code how you do this exactly. So cool. So there's a lot of ways in which you can implement APIs or a lot of different languages. But for this demo specifically, we're going to be using Flask, which is a Python web app framework. And what I like about Flask is that Python itself is like very readable. And Flask, like you can actually make a web app in only like a few lines of code. It's very like readable, and like great for hackathons too, when you're trying to like smash together a project in only an hour or like 24 hours, not an hour, 24 hours. It's really great for that. And also like JavaScript, there's the Node and Express frameworks. I have examples of that as well after that I can share with you if you're interested in using JavaScript. And for the front end, we're just going to use plain old HTML, but we're going to use Jinja templating. So this is also part of the whole like Flask framework. There's Jinja templating in order to help us render the data that the backend or our server like sends back to the front end. But if you like, you can also use React. And I personally like using React too, but didn't want like information overload in this workshop. And I'll show you how you can use React for your front end or for your client side if you want to do that instead. And React is a JavaScript front end framework, which is really nice. And a lot of companies use that. And also a lot of companies use Flask too. I used it in a past internship, so very, very applicable. And then lastly, I'll show you how you can use a wrapper or a third-party library in order to handle the HTTP request for you to Spotify. So in a hackathon, I recommend not like reinventing the wheel on anything. So I'll show you how to use the request library in order to talk to the Spotify API. But I honestly recommend using a library, and Spotify is a library that you can use because it makes your life a lot easier. It'll handle all the authorization for you. It'll handle like the token management for you. So like when you authorize with Spotify, like your token will expire after like a minute or two, or maybe not a minute or two, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes it'll expire. So the library will handle all of that for you, so you don't have to sit and like code something that someone else already has a library for. So I highly recommend looking at to see if any API that you use, I recommend looking and seeing if there is a library that you can talk with in order to, a library for that language. So this is a Python library. And then I also have an example for a Node library with Spotify, but I recommend looking at a library or something called a wrapper in order to handle the HTTP request. It's kind of like an extra layer between like your browser, your server, and the API. So yeah, now time for some code. I'm gonna pause for questions. I don't know if anyone has any questions now. I'll pause for a minute for questions. I know that was like information overload. Cool. I'll also wait until the end, or at the end, we'll have a 15-minute session as well. I know asking questions is scary too, but feel free to ask honestly anything in the chat. Cool. So now time for some code. So as I mentioned before, we'll be using Flask in order to make this web application that will talk to Spotify. And this web application is going to be pretty simple. It'll just be displaying the top 20 songs that I've listened to this year. And it will also display the current playing songs. So we'll get to see like the current song that I'm listening to in Spotify. So in order to start up a Flask app, you go and you download Python, and then there's something called pip, which is a Python package installer, package manager. So recommend getting Python and pip, and then you can just do pip install Flask. And then it'll download the Flask framework for you. And then similarly, you can do pip install Spotify, and that will download the Spotify library for you. So the structure of the application is pretty boiled down to a few files. So I have this init.py file, which is basically what is creating the Flask app for me. And then over here, I've defined this Spotify.py file over here. Sorry, there's a lot of tongue twisters here. The Spotify.py file over here. And basically this is something called a blueprint, which is like a micro app inside of this app. And it's a great way to like split up your code into like different components. So here's where like the majority of the logic is going to live. And then I have this templates file here, which is rendering the client side stuff. So this base.html page is just like a simple HTML page. And I have like Bootstrap in here. And then I have these things called blocks. So these are Jinja templating. So in these blocks is where the other HTML file, so this file I have here is actually like extending that file. And in this block content here, I'm going to replace like whatever is in here with like all this stuff. And I can go over this in more detail towards the end as well. So cool. So here with Flask, you can define these routes. So every time I go to this route in my browser, it's going to do all of this logic for me. And then it's going to render whatever I return here. And if you are using, so here the server is going and rendering the HTML. So every time I like go to this page, it's kind of like Facebook. I was showing you like every time you go to www.facebook.com, it returned an HTML page. So similar to here, I'm going to go to like this website that I'm going to generate locally, and it's going to go to this HTML page that I've defined here. So yeah, with the Spotify library, the first thing I need to do is define all the scopes. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where you want to limit like the access that you give people to your app. So here, you're saying that you only have access to reading their top songs, getting their currently playing track, and being able to modify like their Spotify playlist or modify like the playback state. So we'll be able to add a song to the back of their queue. So those are the only 3 actions that you can take with someone else's Spotify. So yeah, this is how you initialize initialize an OAuth object with Spotify. And once I do all the OAuth information, so once I go and I log into my Spotify, it's going to actually create a local cache and store that information. So I actually don't recommend, if you're like working at a company and like building something for production, I don't recommend doing it this way. I recommend like having a table that actually stores this data, like a database table that stores this data. This is just a hackathon, so we're going to store this information in like a local file or like a local cache that we can access throughout while we're working with this information. So cool. So when I go to my main page, I am going to execute this function over here. And first it's going to go and look in the cache and say like, is there an access token there that's already cached? And is it not expired? So do I have a token and is it not expired? And if so, I'm going to set the session. So this is a session object. What's really nice about Flask is you can import a bunch of libraries that do stuff for you. So here I'm setting the sessions access token to the access token in my cache, and then I'm redirecting to this page over here. So I'm redirecting to here. But if I don't have a token, so right now, say I like, this is my first time visiting this app, I haven't logged in yet. So here I want to redirect the user to the login page so they can write their credentials in. And then I want to, so I want to redirect them to the login page where they can like enter in their credentials. So in order to do that, we're going to define a login URL, and we're going to use the Spotify OAuth object, and we're going to get the authorized URL. And then here, we're just going to redirect them to the login URL. Authorize. Just making sure I don't spell anything wrong, because when I'm coding, I always spell things wrong. So cool. So in order to run this Flask app and to see this redirection, over here, I am going to do Flask run. And now it's serving my app on to this URL. So this is just like a local URL that I can go to. And I'm just gonna go into an incognito. So let's see. Cool. So right now I don't have an access token at all. So it's prompting me to go to this login page and enter my username and password. So after I enter my username and password, pretend I like entered it in, what happens is that it goes, so when you authenticate with Spotify's app, and when you hit log in, you have to give it a redirect URL for it to send a GET request to. So Spotify is going to send a GET request to a URL that I've defined, and it will give me the authorization code. So where to actually define that URL, let me go here. So if you go to the developer tool in Spotify, I'll take you to this dashboard where you can define a bunch of projects. So this is my project, and this is my client ID, and I have a client secret. And if you see in the URL over here, when it generates the URL, you can see the scopes, and then you can see like in this URL, there is a client ID there. So basically this is the ID of this Spotify app here, and it's saying like, I want to give you permission to like access this app, or I want like you to give me permission to like use your information in this app. So over here, I've defined this redirect URL. So when I hit that login button, it's Spotify is going to send a request to this URL over here. And it's going to take that authorization code, and I'm going to exchange that for a token so I can authorize or like have access to my information in Spotify. So here's how we define that logic. So this is the OAuth/callback logic. So after I hit login, Spotify is going to go here, and it's going to say, I'm going to get the code, and I need to exchange that for a login token. So in order to do that, I define something called token info, and I am with the Spotify OAuth object. I am getting an access token, and I'm inputting in the code. And then I need to set the access token in the session object, which I was doing up here originally, so that now I have this special token that I can talk to Spotify with. So in order to do that, I'm getting the access token from here and setting the sessions access token to be this access token, and then I'm going to redirect. Oops. To here. And this is a way in Flask in order to say like redirect to this method. So then it's going to run this method and display my HTML template down here. So yeah, so if I go back to my web app over here, nope, that's not it. So if I go back here, let me just navigate back here. And if I log in with my username and my password, cool. So it will go, it hit this OAuth URL here, and then it goes here and it says that I don't have this defined because we need to define it down here. So yeah, that's the whole OAuth flow using the Spotify library. You can also do it without the library, which is more involved. And I'll actually show you how to send requests without the library. So you basically have to like hit Spotify's API directly, which I'll go over in this method here. So now that we have the access token, I want to get the user's top tracks or like the current songs that the user is listening to. So in order to do that, we can go to the Spotify library over here. So this is the documentation. So all the OAuth stuff is in here and I'll share it with you after, or it's linked in the slides at the end. And here you can get, there's this method here that's like current user playing tracks. So this is what we want. We want to get the current user, which is me, and we want to get the current playing track, but we also want to get something called the top tracks. So we also want to get the top songs that I've listened to. So in order to do that over here, I'm going to define this over here, top tracks result is the Spotify API dot current user top tracks. Cool. And this here is just getting the access token that we set in the session and initializing this object here, this Spotify object here, and I'm getting the current user, spelled that wrong, current user top tracks over here. So if I navigate back to my browser over here, hit refresh, and now I can see here that my top tracks on Spotify are all of Taylor Swift's new album and some Dua Lipa, all that I listened to. Cool. So in order to see the response that we get back from the API, I'm just going to print out top tracks result here. And if I refresh this page and I go here, we get this huge blob of data that it's hard to make sense of at times. If I actually use this tool called Postman, which is a client, like a client that you can send requests to. So here I am directly sending a GET request to the Spotify API, which is what the library was doing, but it kind of like takes out that middleman. And in the authorization here, this is the access token that I was using originally in order to get access to my information. So when I send this GET request, I get all of this information here in a more readable format than me printing it out there. So here I can see that my first top track here is Taylor Swift and whatever track name that is. And there's a lot of cool information, like you can get the album cover information, what available markets it is in, how popular the song is, what album it's part of. So a lot of like really cool information. And you can also hit other endpoints in the API and get information about like how many beats does this song have, like the danceability of the song. So different cool information like that. So over here, what I'm doing is I'm parsing that information. So over here in the response, there's a list of items, and each item has this JSON object, or this object, if you want to call it. And I'm just going through and I'm saying, I want to get like the artist, the album name, the name of the track, the image in order to display. And then I'm passing all that information into this template. And then eventually over here, you see that it's rendered like this. Cool. So now I want to get the user is currently playing song, or what song I'm currently listening to. And in order to do that, similar to what I did before here, where I was getting the current user's top tracks, I just want to get the current user playing track. So this is the song that the user is currently playing. And then over here, I just want to go and I want to parse all of this information like in there. So we want to do something like this. So here I'm saying that if I get a response back from Spotify, then I want to get the current item, and I want to get the current song's name, the album image, and the artist image. So if I go back here, we still don't see anything. I think I have to be playing a song. I'm gonna play, I don't know if anyone has song suggestions, but I'll play like a different song. So then if I go back here and I refresh, you can see that I'm listening to Shake It Off. So yeah, that's how we go and get information such as like my top tracks or like what I'm currently listening to using the Spotify library in order to send an HTTP request to Spotify's API. So in order to do this without the library, is you can use the requests library in Python in order to like directly send the HTTP request yourself instead of using the library. So that's kind of like what we did in Postman here, is that we want to send a request to this URL. And in order to do that, over here, instead of this, I'm just going to comment this out. I'm going to say my top tracks result is equal to request.get. And if I go to the documentation over here, so this is get a user's top tracks. I'm just going to send a get request to this URL here. And then I believe I have to put the type. And then I have to pass in my authorization token, which I need to define here. So in order to do that, I am defining a header called authorization. And I'm passing in the bearer token. So this is setting the access token like in here. This is the bearer token, and I'm passing in my token. So that's what this is basically doing. It's like the equivalent of that in Postman. And so if I refresh and I go back to my web app, so we tabs open. Oh. One more thing that I forgot is I got to make this a JSON object, because if we print the response, it will just be a string, which is what this error is, saying like the object is not scriptable. And then if I refresh, I still get all of my top tracks, which is really cool. Yeah, so one last thing I want to show you, since we've been working a lot with GET requests, I want to show you a POST request to Spotify. So we want to be doing this POST request here. And here you can see all the different information you can get. You can get like, what is this? Yeah, you can get like the audio features for a track, which has a bunch of cool analysis. So if you're interested in doing some like machine learning data analytics with like predicting what, or like kind of predicting what mood a song is associated to or something like that. This is the endpoint that you want to hit. But over here, in order to update a user or like the queue or an item on the queue that you're listening to. So Spotify, like you can add items to your queue and those are the songs that will be played next. So in order to do that, you just hit this post request here. But we can also do that with the Spotify library. So if I do something like this, add to queue, and I add the track ID. So this track ID is gotten from here. So here, when I click this button over here, it's saying that I want to send the current tracks ID to this URL. And when I go here, I have access to the track ID. So if I go back to my app over here, and I believe if I add to queue, oh, one last thing. Over here, I need to redirect back to this page, top tracks. So it's going to redirect back here, and it's basically just going to like refresh the page. So over here, if I add to queue, it reloads the page. And that's like one downside with just like serving HTML from your server is that every single method here that you define, you have to have it end in a render template. So like every single action that you take on the website, you have to have it like refresh the page and like display new information. But if you use React, you can do a single page app, or they call it SPA, single page app, where every time you click on an action, you can just modify the React state and have it re-render for you instead of having to like reload the page every time you click on something. I can show you an example of that after this as well. So I'm going to add Cardigan to my queue. And then the next song I'm playing is Cardigan. So yeah, that's how you do a post request to modify a resource in Spotify. So a GET request is, again, getting all the information that you want or that you requested from Spotify. And post is modifying Spotify's information. So like in this example, I modified the current playing track, or yeah, like the next track the user is listening to. Cool. So I have some resources here that go over everything that we went through. Here's a link to the code for this workshop is here. There's also information on how to set up the app and how to clone this on GitHub, and how to install Flask and how to set everything up. And then I've linked the slides again here. There's also a bunch of other cool resources. So there's a node library. There is an example I did recently with React and Node using Spotify. And then I also have a bunch of resources on further reading about APIs. I find that Free Code Camp is really good. I won't play that now, but yeah, Free Code Camp is really awesome for learning new skills. I highly recommend. And yeah, thank you so much for attending the workshop. Please let me know if you have any more questions on any of this. And it doesn't have to also be questions on this content. You can also ask me about my job or like college or yeah, honestly, like anything that you're curious about.
We will be having a Q&A session until 3:15. So if you have any questions for Sreeya, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, feel free to also post in the chat. I don't know if they have the chat option if you're too scared to like speak up.
By the way, thank you very much for your time. Is it possible to have the slides?
Yeah, of course. I will link them in the Discord, or I can send them in the chat again.
Okay, thank you.
And at the end, there's a link to the code as well, but I'll repost that. And if you're curious how to implement the Spotify API with Node and React, I also have an example of that. Here we go. If you're curious on using React, this one is funny in that I use the audio features in order to animate a circle or like a sun scene or a moon scene. I don't know if this link works still. I'll try it. But yeah, when there is, so if you send a request to Spotify, the audio features, you can get back like the danceability of a track or how like upbeat it is. So I basically like use that in order to determine like whether to render a sun scene or a moon scene. So if it's like shake it off, I think. Oh yeah, so I'll render a sun. And then if we play like a sad song, like folklore. What song is this? Oh, like Cardigan. Yeah, so Cardigan is like a moon scene because it's sad. Yeah, but with this, as you can tell, I don't have to hit like the refresh button every time I'm playing a new song, because if we go to the network tab, which is where all the magic happens, I'm sending a request. The front end, which is done in React. So the React app is sending a request like every 8 seconds to search for like the current playing track. So if I start up the song, it'll like send a request and then it'll know to like, oh, there is something playing, let me render it. So that's another like cool thing that you can do with React. If you're interested in that. Yeah, so if I wait a few seconds, it'll know that I stopped playing something and then it'll stop. Yeah, that's like another example if you're looking to do something a little bit more fancy. Yeah, there's so many cool things that you can do with the Spotify API, which is why I love it.
Thank you so much for all of these resources.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'll stop sharing too.
Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm new to this stuff, like a beginner onto API. Could you share like your experience when you first started off and how you got started?
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like I didn't fully understand how APIs work until like my current job, which I started like a year and a half ago. But I highly recommend. Yeah, and I was also a computer science major in college, and they didn't teach us this stuff, and I didn't really like learn about it myself for like 4 years. So I highly recommend just like picking like Googling something that you're interested in, like some data that you're interested in analyzing, such as like it can be your Spotify songs, or it can be like your Gmail activity, or like even something simple like the weather. Weather is always a good first app, like making a weather app, like using the Open Weather API, and kind of just like outlining like what the requirements are for the application. So like when I load the page, I just want to display like today's weather. And then from there, like after you define the requirements of the app, go in and see like what data do I need? Like how do I send this request to this API to get that data? And then how do I display it? So like when building a web application, the only like two things you need to think about is where do I get the data from? How do I get that? And how am I going to display that to the end user or create like a good user experience? So yeah, I recommend like following tutorials, like the free code camp is like awesome, I think, for beginners. But in order to like really understand the concepts, I think like building out a passion project, or it doesn't even have to be something you're passionate about, like something you're just like interested in looking at, like defining that project and then like going and figuring out like where can I get the data from. This is a long and rambly answer, but yeah, I recommend just like going and like building things that you're passionate about, and that's like the best way to learn is like by doing things.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you said you graduated college and you had your major, and then when you applied for your job, how is it like, what did you present to have them be like, okay, did they like tell you that they were gonna retrain you with what they wanted you to know, or was it intimidating, not really knowing what you were going to be doing?
Yeah, I think like your first internships or first jobs are always intimidating because like you are new to your industry, you're working with a lot of people who probably have a lot more experience than you. But yeah, I think when looking for jobs, like I think it's important to look at an environment where they're very welcoming to learning new things. So like my job right now, I felt like I've had like really strong mentorship and people who are very invested in my growth and development and like very interested in training me. But yeah, I think when you don't have a lot of like experience and you're applying to jobs, I think going to hackathons and like developing a project and putting it on a public URL to like demonstrate the work and skills that you have like is really valuable. Like making a website or like a web app using an API and putting it on like hosting it on like Heroku or I think Heroku is really great for hosting web apps and you don't need to pay anything for it. And showing it off, like sending the link to the recruiter or putting that link in your resume, like makes you so much more valuable to other companies. And it's actually a lot of people like don't do that. A lot of people applying to engineering roles like don't show off their work enough. Like they put their code on a GitHub, but like having a link and like actually people being able to click on it and like seeing your work is really cool and like will make you like that much more valuable or like put you like your resume at the top of the pile. I definitely recommend doing that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. It's always kind of a scary thing to jump from what you learn from a textbook in school to what you actually need to know when they accept you into their company. So I was wondering how you made the jump and if it was really scary.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of schools are behind in teaching things sometimes. Like I think the best experiences that I had in college with learning new things was going to workshops and like going to hackathons or like my internships. Or I also took a lot of interesting classes like web development was really interesting. And I took a intro to data analytics class, but those were later on in my college experience. So yeah, I recommend like, yeah, I agree. It is like really scary going from textbook to real world. But yeah, I recommend doing exactly what you're doing now is like attending hackathons and building things to put on your resume to like show off to recruiters.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Is there any other questions?
Does anyone have any questions? You can type it out if you're afraid to unmute yourself.
If there is no other questions, I want to share that the next workshop will start at 3:30, and the next workshop will be about, which one is it?
4:45.
Then the next one will be 4:45. So yeah. So yeah, I think
Thank
if
you
there's
once again, Sreeya. Yeah. If no one has any questions, I think we can end the workshop right now. I just want to thank Sreeya again for putting up so many resources just for us.
Yeah,
definitely.
thank you so much for having me. And like this stuff is super challenging, and like I said, I didn't get it until like 3 or 4 years. So if you're feeling lost after like 30 minutes, totally normal. I think just like keep fine-tuning the skills, and like it's so hard to learn something in like 20 minutes or like
Mhm.
1 hour. Just like keep doing your reading, keep building things, and don't get discouraged, because I know like a lot of times coding is like frustrating when you're like banging your head on the keyboard, like why isn't this working? But yeah, just definitely like, I know it's cheesy, but like keep at it, and don't get discouraged. Like I only have like 4 years of experience coding, and a lot of people I work with have like 10, 20 years experience. So I totally feel that like imposter syndrome, or like, I don't really know what's going on. So we all feel that at different points in our career. Yeah, like thank you so much for coming and for being courageous and
you.
trying something new.
Well, thank you very much, Sreeya, and I hope you guys learn a lot of things about API. Definitely, it was a lot of use. There were like a lot of useful informations. So yeah, thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Yeah, of
So
course.
Phil, should I stop the recording now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop the recording now then. Stop recording, right?